Starting us off with number 10 is The Hand. This one's from Stephen Wagner, who said his dad told him the story. So back in 1942 in Juarez, Mexico, his dad was around 20 years old and he went to a circus that was visiting town. His younger brother came along and they didn't really go to see the acts, they were more interested in the freak shows. Disappointed after seeing the performers, they were about to leave with two girls when they ran into a short, stubby man. The stranger introduced himself as the greatest illusionist in the world. That's quite a hefty title. When asked if he was part of the circus, the man said the owner turned him down because his act was so frightening. The owner said he was Satan himself. Once he had their attention, he invited them back to his trailer in order to show them the act. Once inside, the stranger put a glove on his right hand, started running his left hand over his right while wiggling his fingers. He then started chanting bizarre words, and when he took the glove off, everyone's jaws just dropped. The stranger's hand was completely skeletal. He turned it, let them see the back, it was completely real. His brother went to take a closer look and the man grabbed his head and said he was really about to show them something now, and at this point everybody shat themselves and made a run for it. The stranger came out onto his porch laughing, and on the floor nearby was a bed of long nails pointing up which he jumped onto. Weird flex, but okay. Blood started coming out of his feet, but he was still just laughing it off, and from that day onwards Stephen's father and brother knew they had met Satan. Coming in at number 9 is Father Urban Grandi. Now Father Urban was a Roman Catholic priest that lived in the Loudun part of France. He was under major scrutiny and received a lot of criticism for ignoring his celibacy vow. If anything, he was known for having sexual relations with many women and as someone who had an elevated sense of lustful depravity. By 1632, he was accused of sending the demon Asmodai to enchant a group of Ursuline nuns into committing evil acts and becoming his sex slaves, you know, as priests do. After numerous nuns made accusations of seduction against him, he was arrested, then acquitted, and then re-arrested. During his second arrest, he was tortured by judges, after which they revealed a contract they found in his bedroom, which indicated he had signed a deal with Satan and many other demons. They saw it as evidence of him making a diabolical pact and convicted him of witchcraft and sentenced him to death. He was burnt at the stake. At number 8 we have A Better Life. This one's from Redditor Kodas_Gaming, who said he had a really rough upbringing. His father abandoned his family and his mother was a heroin addict. He used to see her getting beat to a pulp, after which she'd take her frustrations out on him. CPS ended up taking him and his brother away, but a few years later his mum was clean and back with their dad and they regained custody. Sort of happy ending, kind of, but not really. They lived in a small house in Central Texas, and according to the user, the house had a terrifying aura. Anytime he was home, he felt like he was being watched, especially in the bathroom, and he would have regular nightmares. And at this point in his life, his mum was working herself to death because their dad was a lazy slob who did nothing. She got so depressed she tried to take her own life, and desperate to help, the user started praying to God every single day. But nothing changed. He realized for something to change, perhaps he could call on the demonic entity that engulfed his house rather than God. He researched satanic rituals for ages and finally found the one he needed. While his family were out for ice cream one day, he got on his knees, wax coming down the candles he'd lit, and cut his hand and started drawing symbols on the ground in his blood. Obviously while crying the whole time, because who wouldn't cry after doing that? He recited the words and made the deal. And right after he did that, a cold breeze swept through the house and everything went black. But he was pretty much unfazed because he expected something like that to happen, so he went to bed that night and had the worst nightmare ever. He saw himself in the reflection of the mirror in the bathroom with corpse grey skin, bloody tears, and his eyes were crimson as well. There was a noose around his neck and his hair was bloody. During the dream he thought, this can't be me, and then the reflection started laughing, saying, "It is now, you made the deal." He woke up in the bathtub covered in scratches and scars, and it just kept happening and getting worse. 1 month later he started seeing things, hearing things, his nail beds began to recede and bleed, his canines became sharper, and his tongue used to get cut out of nowhere, and he started full on hallucinating and having visions of the past, of native people being slaughtered. And how did that even happen? I don't even know. And what did he get out of all of this? Other than his mum getting a higher paying job, not much at all. So moral of the story, know what you're getting into before you ask the devil for help. Filling our number 7 slot is Joseph Smith. Now Joseph was a Mormon prophet in the early 1800s who claimed he encountered Satan before he saw Christ for the first time. We have both big big shots in one story, how about that? The story goes that despite never doing this before, one day he just decided he was going to pray to God out loud. He went into the woods on a sunny day and knelt down and began to pray. I don't know why he went into the woods, he could have just done it in his house, but okay. But as soon as he did, he said he felt he was seized by a power that engulfed him entirely. He said it was so powerful he tried to speak but felt like his tongue was bound. A thick darkness surrounded him and he thought for sure he was going to die. And I mean, fair enough for being realistic. If I felt that, I'd probably think I was gonna die too. He was ready to sink into this despair that was around him, but in one final hope he used all his strength to call on God to get him out of Satan's hold. Then all of a sudden he saw a huge pillar of light over his head which came down on him. As the light rested on him, he saw two personages in the air above him and everything was fine again. At least this one had a happy ending, sort of. Now at number 6 is Madame Lalaurie. Delphine Lalaurie has been mentioned many times on this channel, but just a quick recap for you. She was a big Creole socialite in New Orleans. To the public, that is. Inside her house, she tortured and killed the majority of her slaves in a way you can't even imagine. In 1834, a house fire took over her mansion, and that's when she got exposed because authorities found bodies upon bodies of bound or mutilated slaves. One's stomach had been cut open and his intestines were wrapped around his neck. A bucket was also found with various organs from various slaves. A bucket. That's how much mass killing the woman was doing, that she needed a bucket for all the organs she was harvesting. Anyway, with some stroke of luck, she managed to escape New Orleans and go to France, but many believe she didn't just escape due to luck. She invented a religion involving voodoo and black magic, and on top of that, people vehemently believe she made a pact with the devil in order to be able to still be wealthy, still be free, and escape whilst committing these horrendous acts. I mean, for me, it was either the devil pact or she paid a lot of important money to let her go. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 5 is the Satanic Cult. This one's from Brad, who said back in 2005, him and his friends spent one summer TPing a lot of houses. In the town they grew up, there were always rumors of a satanic cult that operated around a 10-minute drive away. So one day they decided to go check it out and TP it. Ballsy move, I have to say. The 5 friends went there the day before moon, which I guess is a part of every scary story you hear nowadays, and they bypassed the fence and ended up in a garden enclosure and heard an eerie high-pitched sound. Ignoring it, they continued to explore, found an old locked church, and found nothing else and decided to leave. Bit anticlimactic, but just stay with me. When they got to their car, their key, which was working perfectly 10 minutes prior, just stopped working. The car alarm started going off and then it magically just unlocked by itself. They piled in and drove off, and mid-drive the lights in the car just went off. The driver didn't press anything to cause it, it just happened. Panicked, they rushed home, and when Brad got to his front porch, he found 3 identical black cats. Keep in mind he lives a good 25 miles away from the cult, so how did these cats even get to his house? He took the cats as a bad omen and decided to take the cats a few miles out of town and leave them there, and the whole drive he was being followed by 2 black cars despite taking small dirt roads. Now I don't know if people were just messing with him here or the satanic cult was there and they saw him and everything was their doing, but either way, it's scary and it's creepy. At number 4 is Giuseppe Tartini. Now from the name, doesn't he just sound like a brilliant Italian musician of some kind? His name just has the ring to it, you know? Anyway, Tartini was an Italian composer and violinist during the Baroque period. He was very influential in Italy, but he was also known for his huge inferiority complex and uncontrollable temper. And I can just see that equaling to a lot of smashed violins. But anyway, the story goes that one day Tartini heard Francesco Verrocchini playing the violin better than him, and he was fuming and also dissatisfied with his own skills. The event made him spiral into depression for months, and in that time he worked in solitude and practiced the violin for 12 hours a day. During this period, it's said he had a dream in which the devil appeared and he met him. He appeared at the foot of his bed and played a sonata on the violin like he invented the damn activity. He offered him success in all his musical dreams in exchange for his soul. Did he accept? Well, it was never really confirmed, but when he woke up the next day, he wrote down as much of the sonata as he could, but no matter how many times he played it, it just wasn't as good as the Devil's version. If you want to check it out, the sonata in question is called the Devil's Trill Sonata, his most well-known piece, and it's quite hard to play even by today's standards. But the fact he could never play it as well as the Devil, I mean, doesn't that just indicate he wasn't successful in everything he wanted to be? So am I the only one identifying this major plot hole we have going on? Did he accept? Did he not? Let me know, Tartini. Filling our number 3 slot is Gemma Galgani. Gemma was an Italian mystic, later saint, in Italy during the late 19th century. She believed that the devil was waging a personal war against her. She said he loved giving her horrible headaches to the point she couldn't even pray. I mean, honestly, I just feel like that was a bad migraine, but moving on. She went on to say that once she was writing at her desk alone and the devil came and dragged her from the table by her hair with such force that her hair came out in clumps. In another attack, the devil took the form of a big black dog and put his paws on her shoulders, making her whole body ache all over. In another one, she was drinking holy water and he twisted her arms so backwards that she fell to the ground in pain. If that's not bad enough, she said he even took on the form of people she trusted or knew, and once he even took the form of an angel. The worst incident though was when he started giving her blows to the head. She ran to her room but found him there with a rope. He kept trying to get her to give in to the wickedness and she kept resisting, and so he kept striking her with the rope as she was on the ground. He then threw her on the bed, then dragged her from it and violently smashed her head against the ground, and she passed out. Just imagine all this happening in your room and no one's there to help you. I'd be terrified. But I'm also curious as to what form the devil took when he attacked her all those times, and if anybody was around, were they seeing this happen? Was she being attacked by an invisible force? Like, what was happening here? Now at number 2 is Steve. This one's from Redditor Shabby Boa, whose real name is Steve and who used to be a trucker for 30 years. One night after a drop-off, he was on his way back home when he stopped at a diner to pee. It was completely empty, no customers, no staff, absolutely no one. He quickly peed, and when he came out, a grey-haired man was sitting at the bar. He told Steve he owned the diner and gave him food and a drink. When he got up to leave, the man said food is not what you truly desired tonight. Weirded out, Steve left and got into his truck. About an hour and a half later, he had to pee again. Steve, you've got a small bladder, mate, and saw another small diner which he stopped at. He went inside and again it was completely empty save a grey-haired man at the bar. It was the same man who said nice to have you back, Steve, as soon as he walked in. Steve got pissed at this point, thinking he was being screwed over by this guy, and demanded to know what the guy wanted. He said he was trying to help Steve. He started asking about Steve and how he used to have a family. Steve told him his wife and daughter died in a house fire years ago caused by faulty wiring. But the man questioned him, saying it wasn't just faulty wiring. The faulty wiring was a happy coincidence that just so happened to have happened the same time Steve left a lit cigarette in the house. Steve fought with him more, and in the end the man offered him a deal. He said he could bring back his wife and daughter in exchange for his soul after he died. Thinking it was complete bullshit, he agreed and left the diner. Before he did, he asked the man who he was, to which he responded, "I am the devil." That night he got home as if he never stopped anywhere at all, and when he entered the house, he heard his wife say, "Steve, is that you?" and the small footsteps of his daughter. He was so excited, but when they came down the stairs, their skin was charred black. Chunks of it were falling off, their clothes had fused and melted with their skin, and Steve could barely hold in his puke. And at that point he'd realized he'd made the biggest mistake ever, and that the next 30 years were literally gonna be hell. And finally, at number 1 is The Man. This one's from VR Greg, who said she met the devil for the first time when she was 8 years old. She was walking through a forest on her way home from school when she encountered a black-haired man in a shabby suit. Except one foot of his was a goat hoof and the other was a rooster claw. She could see them when she looked at him directly, but peripherally they looked completely normal. She took him for a walk and then he left. By the time she was a teenager, she assumed the counter was maybe a dream, or maybe that she just imagined the whole thing. But one day she was watching a news story about a man who got away with killing his wife, and as they showed the judge announcing the not guilty verdict, the murderer turned around and smiled at a man behind him who wasn't his lawyer. She recognized him right right away. Black hair, shabby suit, hadn't aged a day. Her parents threw her a surprise 16th birthday to which nobody came to, which is just really sad. I'm sorry that happened to you. She ran home crying and she knew no one came because her classmate Erin had her party the same day just to spite her. That night she slept thinking about all the horrible ways Erin deserved to be punished, and the next day at the breakfast table her dad looked shaken. He told her that Erin had been found dead in the park. She met the devil the same day in her room and he told her she had wanted it to happen and he executed it for her. He offered her a deal, but thankfully the one piece of common sense that 90% of people possess is knowing that you should never make a deal with the devil, so she didn't. The girl didn't see him again until the funeral of her mother, where he told her the doctors lied to her about her mother dying peacefully, that it was agony and that no one was around to help her. She started immediately screaming and her dad ran over to her and made her sit down. When she asked him where the black-haired man was, he said, "You were standing alone, honey," and just started screaming out of nowhere. Shivers. That gave me shivers.
Number 10. Will Carroll. Will Carroll, the drummer of the band Death Angel, caught COVID-19 at the end of his band's European tour. It was a long, hard battle, and thankfully, Carroll was able to come back from it, but the battle along the way may have included an encounter with Satan himself. The virus put him in a critical state, which involved Carroll lying unconscious in his hospital bed for 12 days straight. In an interview with San Francisco Chronicle though, Will revealed that those 12 days were spent in a peaceful dream state. In his dreams, or I would call them nightmares, the devil would punish him repeatedly for the sin of sloth. The devil would apparently turn him into a bulbous-like creature and make him puke blood until his heart gave out. These were the dreams he was having over and over again. Since recovering from the disease, needless to say, Carroll has changed his lifestyle habits. For more reason than this one, it appears recovering from this awful virus we all hate definitely felt like returning from hell. Maybe the virus is from there too. Wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. Number 9. Giuseppe Tartini. Everybody wants to be the best at something, but for Tartini the best just wasn't good enough. Tartini was born on April 8th, 1692, and the guy might as well have been born with a violin in his hand. He was brilliant, a brilliant musician and composer, and he thought so too, until one day he heard someone playing the instrument he dedicated his life to with a kind of expertise that he had never heard. This sent him spiraling, and for 12 days Tartini locked himself away practicing all hours of the day. While he drove himself mad, the devil decided to pay a visit to a desperate soul in a dream. He offered to make Tartini the most masterful violinist in the world in exchange for his soul. Like the wise guy he was, he asked for a demonstration, so the devil picked up the instrument and played a sonata with ease and beauty like nothing he'd ever heard before. When Giuseppe awoke, he scrambled to write down the sonata, which has become easily one of his most popular pieces of work. Its name? The Devil's Trill, and I listened to it and it is beautiful. For his entire career though, Tartini remained frustrated with the piece, as he was never able to play it exactly as he had heard it. This story is a reminder to never make a deal with the devil, as you never really get what you asked for. Number 8. Rose la Tulipe. It appears that the devil and the violin kind of go hand in hand. The story of Rose la Tulipe is a famous French-Canadian story and one of my absolute favorites. The woman who shared this story with me swears it was true, and I can't help but believe it either. Rose begged her father to host a dance on the eve of Lent, and he agreed, but with one condition: that at midnight the dancing had to stop. Dancing wasn't allowed during Lent, so if they continued, they would be sinning. Rose agreed, and everyone came to join on the night, and Rose danced with anyone who would, even with other men, though she was engaged. Then at 11 p.m. a knock came at the door, and the priest opened it to reveal a dazzlingly handsome stranger, and Rose fell hard. The priest welcomed him and requested that he take off his hat, shoes, and jacket, all of which the man refused, saying he wasn't staying long. He immediately swept Rose in a dance and asked no one else for the remainder of the evening. As soon as midnight hit, the dancing stopped, but the man whispered in her ear, "Just one last dance, my Rose." With struggles she resisted, but suddenly her feet, bewitched it seemed, began dancing without her. The man then kissed her, and the spark from their kiss set the house ablaze. The next morning Rose was found mumbling around the ashes, now mysteriously an old woman, the devil having taken part of her soul with him. I know, that sounds like a legend, but like, thanks for indulging me because I really love that story and I want an opportunity to tell it, so here it is. Other versions say that she actually got taken back to hell with him, and another is that her mother came and saved her. a whole bunch of stuff, but I think that one's my favorite. Okay, number 7, Richard Cable. Richard Cable might as well have been the devil himself. A squire at Brooke Manor in Devon, England in the 1600s, he was known as a monstrously cruel man. He abused his wife, and one night she escaped him with him hot on her heels. He killed her and her faithful dog, but little did the man know that that dog would haunt him for the rest of his days, and there would be many. At least that's what Cable thought. Cable had made a deal with the devil to live forever, but mysteriously, Cable passed away in 1677. But it appears the devil did give him everlasting life, as a spirit walking the moors at night, forever being chased by a herd of hounds. The locals even put iron bars around his tomb because there were so many sightings of him wandering around the moors. Instead, now, a red glow occasionally emits from his resting place, and the howls of demons are said to gather, waiting to claim his soul for their master. Number 6, Saint Dunstan. Saint Dunstan was a saint who lived in 900s, and for some reason the devil loved to visit him. He was a talented metalsmith, and one day an old man requested that he make a chalice for him. Dunstan agreed, but when he looked back up at the old man, he had shifted into a woman, and then very suddenly a boy. Immediately he knew it was the devil, but fearing his wrath, concealed his distress and crafted the chalice. Subtly though, he put his blacksmith tongs in the fire, and quick as he could, he thrust the tongs onto Satan's nose and cast him from the cell. That wouldn't be the last time he saw the devil though. Dunstan would face him once again and attack the devil by hammering into his hoof, and only agreed to remove it if the devil agreed never to cross a threshold where a horseshoe hung. And that's why today horseshoes are considered good luck, so take a lesson from that. Number 5, A Boy Named Scott. An article written by Richard J. Bonifant recounts several near-death experiences in order to try and see similarities. Some usually describe a light or a tunnel, but after a little boy named Scott got into an accident, he may have met something much darker. On June 10th, 1995, Scott and his family were enjoying getting ice cream from the ice cream truck, as you do, but Scott was so excited he ran out from behind the truck and he got hit by another motorist. He was almost declared dead, but 8 hours later, thankfully, he awoke in intensive care. The weirdest part was that he described in perfect detail what had happened to him as if he was watching from across the street. He knew every single detail. It was really freaky. He even recalled trying to give his dad a hug, but passing right through him. The scariest thing though was who he ended up meeting. He suddenly faced a dark vortex and felt himself being drawn into it by the haunting, putrid image of the devil. Scott said he looked like a man made of rotting flesh, and he tried to grab Scott, but he was whisked away into a tunnel of light, so it was kind of like the devil's trying to steal him from God. I'm glad things ended well for the little boy, getting to be with his family again, but still, not something anyone wants to see in the afterlife. Number 4, Dr. Paul Thigpen.
All of a sudden I felt as if the darkness had filled my whole body, and that there was maybe a little part of it that was still me.
That was a clip of an interview with Dr. Paul Thigpen, who despite being raised under a Christian household, became an atheist before he was even 12 years old. That is until one day he was hanging with his friends when he was around 17 by the water in the front seat of a car. All 3 of them were squished in, and a palpable darkness began pressing into the top of his head, all the way to the bottom of his toes. He said it took over the majority of his body, and though he'd become an atheist, he didn't drink or do drugs, so we know this isn't a psychedelic experience, but his body suddenly felt like a kind of superhuman strength taking over him. A voice in his head whispered, "I'm throwing you into the water." To this day, Dr. Paul can't swim, and his body started moving across his friend's seat to leave the car. He knew he was going to die. Then he heard another voice that said, "Focus on the cross." He suddenly remembered the cross his girlfriend gave him, so he grabbed it, and meanwhile his friends were like freaking out. After holding the cross for a while, he said the darkness subsided, and when he told his friend what had happened, he said, "That's strange. The same thing happened to my girlfriend." He sought counsel from another friend who without a doubt said that he had been visited by the devil. Later he discovered that his girlfriend's friend was a witch, and that kind of pointed all the arrows in that direction, so who knows. Was it a demon or in fact the devil? Either way, something changed his mind. Watch the rest of the interview and decide for yourself. Number 3, the man with the glowing eyes. Reddit user Dabby_U_69 had an experience as a kid that I don't think anyone could be the same after. They grew up in a pagan pagan household, which apparently meant you saw a lot of weird stuff. But one day, on a Tuesday in the afternoon, she was playing with the daughter of a family friend who they called Jay, just outside as you do. So they're just playing, and then all of a sudden Jay just stops dead in her tracks and points behind her. She froze and then turned around slowly to see, and I quote, a tall shadow man about 6-7 feet tall in a trench coat and hat. The scariest thing about him was his eyes. Oh god, his eyes. Huge, red, and glowing circles, but its actual eyes were small, bloodshot, and his pupils were tiny. The man reportedly tried to strangle them, but they bolted too quick for the house. Once they told their moms, they in turn freaked out because apparently at the same time the man appeared, the TV had turned long static. They brought in a psychic who said, "My love, the devil is here and he wants to hurt you. He was sent by someone, but we don't know who." The woman then gave a crystal bottle filled with sage and lavender along with something else to ward him off, and apparently the bottle is running out. So I hope she's okay. Number 2. Father Gabriel Amorth. Father Gabriel Amorth was the official exorcist for the Diocese of Rome and claimed to have performed 60,000 exorcisms before he died in 2016. But one day in 1997 he encountered a spirit he never thought he'd see. A slim young peasant man was escorted to a small room where Father Amorth waited him. Immediately he knew something was wrong. He requested the help of Jesus, and as soon as he did, the man began to spit and curse in English, which wasn't a language the man was known to speak. But then the man was seething with anger and drool dripped from his mouth as he stared down the father. He tried to attack him, but the exorcist held him back with prayers, demanding the demon reveal its name. He called out, "Unclean spirit, whoever you are and all your companions who possess this servant of God, I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." The man snarled, and what came out next paralyzed him. Dripping evil, the man said, "I am Lucifer." He continued fighting the devil with prayer, and the windows formed ice crystals as he did so. The man also bent backwards for 25 minutes, howling at him, then began hovering at 3 feet in the air. Was it him? We don't know! We just don't know, but it certainly sounds like it. Number 1, last but not least, we kind of have to talk about this because I think a bunch of people saw the devil here. Castle Huska is one of the creepiest places in the world, as it was specifically built to keep the devil inside. Legend says that the castle was built over a gateway to hell. From afar, it looks like a typical old castle until you get closer. The castle wasn't built to be lived in, as evident by the fake windows and doors. Though there's a way inside, people don't recommend you step foot in there. In 878 AD, winged beasts and half-human creatures spilled from the gateway and terrorized the people in the village. Somehow they held them off long enough to build the place, but they were still curious. When construction first began, prisoners in the village would be offered a pardon if they agreed to be lowered by rope into the hole. The first man to attempt it is said to have met the devil himself while he was down there. He was tied up and slowly lowered. After a few moments in the darkness, the man began screaming and begged to be pulled up. By the time they hauled him up, he looked as though he aged 30 years. His hair was white, his skin creased and speckled. They tried to discover what he had seen, but the man was incoherent and was later put into an insane asylum before dying 2 days later.
Number 10. Richard Cabell. This man lived in Devon, England during the 1600s and was apparently a huge dirtbag. He would torment people in his town and even abuse his wife. One night, in a violent rage, he struck his wife and she tried to escape. He then hunted her down and killed her and her dog. We all know what happens next. People believe that he felt he had the freedom to treat everyone horribly because he made a deal with the devil for immortality. But he did eventually die on July 5th, 1677. After he died, there were reports of a ghostly figure walking around the gravesite. This freaked out the locals so much, so they put a giant slab of stone on top of his grave, as well as encased the tomb with metal bars. And it was said that at night you could see a ghostly figure that kind of looked like a beast with glowing red eyes. Some people thought that it was Satan looking for the soul that belonged to him. Number 9. The Carpenter. The devil's weaved into history in so many different places. This ancient tale comes from a village called Tyrol in Austria. The legend has it that the locals had a well-traveled bridge that they used to cross from their village to a village called Schruns. One day, the bridge was destroyed in a massive flood. The villagers were very distressed, so they got help from a local carpenter. They told him that if he could rebuild the bridge in 3 days, they would pay him a huge amount of money. He knew such a task would be impossible, so he asked the villagers if he could have a day to think about it in order to come up with a solution. That night, when he was trying to find a way to build the bridge in such a short period of time, he was visited by a man with a little green hat. I love how these stories just have some creepy dude that shows up to your house in the middle of the night, and you're like, I wonder what he wants. Couldn't be anything bad. Well, the little man told the carpenter that he would build the bridge for him, and he could keep all the money. The only thing he wanted in return was the soul from the first person to leave this house and cross the bridge. The carpenter knew this was the devil, so he had a plan. The next day, the bridge was built, and the carpenter showed up. The devil saw him there and was jumping in excitement to get his prize. Then, the carpenter pushed a goat onto the bridge and said, "Here's your soul. You got played, dude." Legend says the devil took the goat and people started roasting him as he was walking around with the goat. People were like, "Hey, you should have read the fine print. Oh, you two look like a great couple." I just love the idea of people roasting the devil. Like, oh, Prince of Darkness can't trick a tradesman. Number 8. George Lukens. Back in the day, if you got sick, you kind of had two options. You either got sicker and died, or you could go to a church and get an exorcism. On May 31st, 1788, George Lukens wasn't feeling too hot. He had started having convulsions, and it was reported that he would yell out in a voice that didn't sound human. So he went to the doctor, but after trying almost everything, the doctors couldn't cure him of whatever his ailment was. So he had plan B. He went to see Reverend Easterbrook to get his soul washed. The Reverend tried to help George, but it seemed that what was tormenting him was too strong for just him. So he brought in 6 other priests to perform a super exorcism. The 7 of them took their combined power to cleanse George. During the process, he changed through 7 different demonic personalities, one of which claimed to be the devil. After the super exorcism, George was cured. And probably didn't live past 35 because that's how life went back then. Number 7. The Codex Gigas. Would you read a book that might have been written by the devil? I think that one's a hard pass for me. I'll stick to reading the back of cereal boxes. Well, the Codex Gigas is said to have the devil's actual handwriting, and whoever reads it becomes cursed. Why would you read that? I don't know if I believe that the devil's handwriting is in the book, but I wouldn't want to be wrong just for some light reading. The story goes that back in 1523, Ludovico Spoletano wanted to make the best spaghetti ever, so he summoned the devil. Nah, I'm just kidding. He wanted to answer a series of questions he'd been asked. Exam season is very tough. It's documented that the devil possessed him, grabbed a pen, and started writing. Most of the text has never been decoded except for one sentence that says, "I think it smells like updog." Number 6. Through the Window. This one was written by Redditor Gayreka. It's a story his father told him about when his dad was growing up. He said that when his dad and uncle were younger, his uncle was a bit of a rebellious kid. Never listened, would stay up late, draw dicks on everything. His father told him that it was a big problem, that his uncle was constantly challenging authority and would get in fights with his parents all the time. Well, one night, the whole family heard a blood-curdling scream come from his uncle's room. The family rushed in there and his uncle was freaking out. He said there was a man standing outside his window. Their father went to check for someone but couldn't find anything. His uncle describes the man as wearing a long trench coat and having no face except for glowing red eyes. After this, his uncle was as sweet as pie, became a respectful member of society. So was this a devil encounter? Or was this a story a father told his son so he wouldn't act up? That's healthy parenting. Scare him psychologically, but he'll be a good kid. Number 5. Michael Scott.
No, God!
Not the hilarious character from The Office. Michael Scott was a Scottish mathematician born in 1175 and is considered one of the most brilliant men to come out of Scotland. He traveled through Europe and eventually ended up in Italy. While in Italy, his brilliance didn't go unnoticed. He gained the attention of Emperor Frederick II. Frederick brought Michael into his court as the head astrologer. But when you're a super smart guy back then, people get a little suspicious. It's said he could summon demons to do his bidding, and they would go all over the world to bring him delicacies. And that's just where his power started. There's myths of him defeating a coven of witches that he turned into stone. It's even said he changed the course of the river Steeds. But the most famous one is him summoning the devil to build a road to his castle. His father had just built a shiny new castle and it needed a road. I mean, you don't want to be the only castle in the neighborhood without a road. Like, what do people think? So he called the devil and many demons to build a road for him. He could have just hired contractors. He owed the devil his soul and foresaw that the devil would kill him by dropping a rock on his head. So he always wore a metal cap. But one day, he took off his metal cap when entering a church, and a rock fell on his head and killed him. They get you when you least expect. Number 4. John Dee. John Dee was born in 1527 on July 13th. He was an Elizabethan mathematician and astrologer, but he also liked to dabble in the occult. He was into some pretty freaky stuff. Even though he was researching black magic behind closed doors, he managed to work his way up as a man of intellect, becoming the royal astrologer for Queen Mary. However, his little secrets caught up with him, and he was arrested for heresy in 1555. How do you get caught for something back then? The only way you would find out would be if you told people. Like, how was your weekend? Pretty good, you know, sacrificed a goat to the Dark Lord. Anyways, when he got out, he kept digging into the occult. In 1582, he claimed to contact the spirit world. People weren't a fan of this, so he had to move up north to the Manchester Collegiate Church. You can go visit his office to this day. There's the desk that he worked at with a giant burn mark in it. It's said that it's the devil's footprint. I would be pissed. I work all this time to summon the devil. He shows up and he puts his feet on my furniture. Number 3, Robert Johnson. Become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, and people are going to start rumors about you. Robert Johnson is one of the most talented and influential blues musicians who has ever walked the earth. And a big myth about him is that he sold his soul to the devil to become as great as he did. As the story goes, he was walking down a highway and came across a man that offered him the ability to play the blues like no one has ever done before, but would cost him his soul. Robert was like, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, what is a soul really? It's like a concept or like whatever. Well, Robert went down in history for his amazing skills and died suspiciously at 27. Number 2, Niccolo Paganini. Said to be the greatest violinist who ever lived. Seemed to be a common theme that back in the day, if you were great at something, they probably thought you sold your soul to the devil. No, it can be that you have like a natural gift and you work super hard, you just made a deal. Well, the same speculation goes for Niccolo. He was an Italian violinist like none other. He was so gifted that he would surpass anyone who ever taught him. He was touring at 15 and probably got hit on a lot. Part of why people probably thought that he had sold his soul to the devil was that he looked so ghoulish. He was tall, skinny, had pale skin, long black hair. He was kind of like a hot Edward Scissorhands. People would even say that they could see the devil hold his violin while he played. I think they were just jealous. Number 1, George Whitefield. Now this one is my favorite for sure. George was a traveling evangelist. He wandered around trying to get people hyped on God. I mean, we've all seen these guys.
Do it, Jesus! A brand new hit! Bam, 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 bam!
In 1740, George was in Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was putting on a banger show. Like, people were going nuts. Apparently, the sermon was so hot and he was bashing the devil so hard that the devil showed up and was like, "You talking?" And George was like, "Yeah, I'm talking." And then he fought the devil. This is like an episode of Maury. George then summoned the holy power to push the devil out, and after that, the devil fell off a cliff and landed on one foot. He's got like a +10 on acrobatics. It's said that the devil's footprint is there to this day. The devil is probably at home like, "Dude, I don't even know you. Why are you talking so much smack?"